thanks all for coming. I guess I get to get us started here. So I'm Lisa Schulte. I'm a professor at Iowa State University in the Department of Natural Resource Ecology and Management. And the topic the organizers wanted me to talk about today is your farm as an ecosystem. And realized I get 25 minutes and I'm going to save 10 of that for questions, but at Iowa State we teach multiple semester-long courses on this topic, right? So it's huge, it's a huge thing, and I'm going to just brush the surface right here and with 5 points, and we can dig deeper in your question and answer. So one, just starting out with that definition of an ecosystem includes living and non-living components and their interactions. The more complicated the structure of an ecosystem, the more function it provides. Of course, organisms are a key component, that biological component of an ecosystem, and all organisms need food, water, space, shelter. As farmers, farmland owners, what's the one key thing that you can do to try to sort of improve the sustainability of your ecosystem? I think this follows on the plenary speaker Jerry Hatfield's comments really well, which is get some continuous living cover on that land, and then what are your next step for resources? So let's dig into those 5 things just a little bit more. So first of all, that definition, an ecosystem includes living and non-living components and their interactions. You could look at your farm field as an ecosystem. We've got the non-living components here with the water. The biology, of course, is a combination of those living and non-living components, and the fact that these elements are interacting. As an ecologist, when I think about an ecosystem, I see this, but I also dig down in and I see things like this. This is the scientist in me speaking, right? We like to sort of divide things up into their little boxes and figure out how all of these things are put together and interact. It's complicated, and that's kind of the point. These things are complicated. That's why we need the science. A few key terms that scientists talk about when we think about ecosystems are the stocks, which is the stuff of the ecosystem. So a soil could be a stock, a population of corn, that could be your stock, a population of beneficial insect, that could be a stock. But we also think about things in terms of flows and the fact that these things are moving in this environment, and also those interactions between, say, a potential, your crop and, say, a potential pest or a potential beneficial insect. These things are moving about. So those are some key terms. When I teach my introductory forest biology students about ecosystems, because this is so complicated, we want to boil it down, give them somewhere to start simple. And this is the acronym we use, CLPS-ROT. Has anybody ever heard of CLPS-ROT before? Yay! You're an Iowa State student, right? Awesome. Yeah, former Iowa State alumni. So this is kind of just that thing that we use to kind of help people think about all the things they need to wrap their minds around as they're thinking about an ecosystem. And the CLI is climate. So that's going to be your rainfall, it's going to be your temperatures, it's going to be disturbance factors. So the tornadoes, the wind, those intense rainfalls, those kind of things. P is the parent material, so that geological template that the ecosystem is built upon. S is the soil, which is a combination of factors, so the climate, the parent material, as well as a few other things, including the R, which affects the soil. Relief, you could say topography, but then it would be CLPS-TOT and people would get confused. So we say CLPS-ROT, so the relief, that's the slope angle, and the slope length, those kind of things. Organisms, that biological component, and the last factor being time. That if you're going to talk about ecosystems, they're not static things. They change over time because of those interactions. The second point is the more complicated the structure of an ecosystem, the more function it provides. And so let's dig into those definitions just a little bit more. One, the structure is just that physical distribution of the live plants, the dead plants, and other non-living material. So, and then let's talk about function. So function is the contribution of a species, a group of species, or a structure to an ecosystem. So those are complicated scientific words. What do we mean? So structure is kind of what you see as you look across your farm landscape. And structure is the stuff that we manage. So we're going to manage the crop environment. We're going to manage the conservation features out there. Those are the structures that we're managing. But we're doing that for a purpose, and it's really the function that we're trying to achieve, what we want out of that ecosystem. We can't manage the function directly. We manage the structure to get to the function. So we manage the crops to get to yield. We put in grass waterways to stabilize soil in certain parts of the farm field. Examples of managing structure to provide function. So this is a wood chip bioreactor. The structure that's being provided is that non-living plant material, the wood chips, and providing that those non-living wood chips, and I'm shunting water through there. It gives a place for microbes to live, and then they can denitrify that water that's moving through that area. So we're providing that structure that provides that function of that denitrification of the water. Another example would be a terrace system. So this would be a non-living example, pushing the soil up to provide that terrace. It's a structure allowing the water that's running across the field, providing that barrier, slowing that water down, using the structure to slow that water down so that we take the power out of it and we lose less of our soil. Now my point is, the more complicated the structure, the more function it provides. And so this is one of my favorite structures. It's a prairie strips on Tim's farm. He's here in the audience. So in comparison to, say, a terrace or a wood chip bioreactor, the prairie strip is providing a lot more complex structure. Okay, you've got lots of roots below the ground, right? You've got lots of plant diversity above the ground. It's placed along his hill slope here, so it slows down that water. Because you have more, in his strips he has about, 30 species, right? So because there's a lot of species here and a lot of structure being provided, what we've seen in our work at Neil Smith National Wildlife Refuge is when you add that to a farm field, you get lots of function. And so this is a summary graphic of some of the functional results that we've found by putting prairie strips on row crop fields in Iowa. Moving on to my third point. So every organism needs food, water, space, and shelter. Soil. It's, the name of the conference. It's our key natural resource that we offer the world here in Iowa. And we all know that the biology of the soil is very important. But in order to support that biology, we need to provide that biology with food, water, space, and shelter. This gets into what Dr. Jerry Hatfield was saying with the carbon inputs into the soil. We need more carbon going into the soil so we can feed that biology, so we can get that increased functional aspects of our soil in terms of increased porosity and infiltration, that macro structure that promotes crop growth and that nutrient exchange. If we want to have those biological organisms there, though, we need to think about the things that they need to make their living. Another big issue today is pollinators. Again, pollinators need food, water, space, and shelter. And a key resource that is missing here in our Iowa landscape is the food resources, the floral resources that provide both nectar and pollen. So if we want to promote those organisms, we need to think about providing those floral resources within our agricultural environment. And then also some of the recreational aspects of the farm. Again, another picture from Tim's farm, but a lot of people here in the Midwest enjoy that cultural heritage of hunting. Pheasant populations, they go up and down here in Iowa, and a key reason why they're not more stable is because of lack of winter shelter, winter and spring shelter. So that shelter is the structure that we provide in terms of plants, provide that shelter that can support our pheasant populations if it's out there. Now, one hard but important thing, in terms of sustaining our farms as ecosystem, how do we promote more continuous living cover? This is probably, completely understandable, bare field in spring from an economic efficiency standpoint. From a sustaining farms as ecosystem standpoint, this is probably the worst thing that we can do, right? So how do we change the situation? How do we get more permanent, continuous living cover out there on the ground? Lots of discussion about that earlier. I'm just going to provide a couple different mechanisms. We have options. So one example, cover crops and reduced tillage. Again, a picture from Tim's farm, providing that cover from the fall over the winter, more roots in the ground, keeping that soil in place, holding those nutrients, helping the water infiltrate. If cover crops aren't an option on the whole farm, maybe putting prairie strips on part of the farm to provide that continuous living cover in at least some strategic areas. And this is establishing prairie strip up in Ida County. One thing that I'm hoping will eventually be more possible in the Iowa landscape are more perennial crops. This is an example of miscanthus over by Iowa City with the University of Iowa biomass power plant. And then Jerry Hatfield also mentioned more diversified crop rotations. As I mentioned at the start, we teach multiple semester-long topics on this course. So what are your next step in terms of resources, in terms of thinking about your farm as an ecosystem? The good news is that there's already a lot of written material out there, as well as material available on the web. One of the projects I'm involved with Prairie Strips, we have a lot of materials out there on the web that are freely downloadable, that can help you understand some of why and how you might think about your farm as an ecosystem. Another project in my lab is an online web tool that we call Peewee, which helps people think about farms and farm landscapes as ecosystems and also as components in watersheds. You can sort of take the risk out of land use decisions, because land use decisions in the real world are risky and super expensive, by playing around in an online tool with different land cover arrangements and hitting some of the buttons on the side here to understand what outputs are provided. So in this case, in this app, you're managing the structure, again, of this landscape, right, by clicking different land use types and placing them in the watershed. And then over here, if you would click this button, it would give you the scores, which are those functional elements that function, those outputs that you want to obtain from your farm landscape or watershed. One of my favorite ways to think about farms as ecosystems is actually out on the farm and talking with farmers and landowners. I highly recommend field days for dialoguing with farmers and farm landowners about how they're managing their farms as ecosystems. You can also have consultations with technical service providers. Tim Youngquist works with my team on the Prairie Strips project, but if you would go to the Plant Iowa Native website, there's a whole list of service providers, people that can come to your farm and do a land walk, for example, and provide you with an interpretation of your farm as an ecosystem, and recommend next step options in terms of managing. And that's all I have for you. So thank you for your attention. And I did finish up with 10 minutes for questions. So yeah, Mike.
Same question as last time you presented in front of me.
Okay.
Do you have a prairie mix that you recommend?
So we don't have a mix of specific species that we're recommending. Every time we're working with a farm landowner in terms of implementing prairie strips, we work very closely with them in terms of the site conditions, right? Because you're going to want seeds that perform well on that site, the clips rot piece, as well as the cost and availability and programs that can support help offset some of those seed costs. So there are, sort of mixes available through NRCS that are standardized, but we tend to use a more sort of a more granular approach and dialogue to get something that we think will work well for that farm.
And working with seed suppliers.
And working with seed, exactly. Yep. Yeah. Great. Yeah, Ann.
Yeah, mine's a couple little questions.
Good.
When I'm beginning to think, I'm from Benton County, as you know, that we need to work with the landowners around our creeks. There's a name for that. What is that?
Like are you talking about the filter strip along the creek or the
I'm
buffer
talking
strip?
about
Or
the name of the farmers that get together to manage
Oh.
that watershed on a specific creek.
Yeah, so like there's can be watershed associations.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's several several watersheds across Iowa that have farmers-led watershed associations now, like Hewitt Creek, Rock Creek are a couple.
There's some in the boom too. Right?
So yeah, so is
They're just getting started.
they're just
Yeah.
Watershed management.
and there's watershed
I'm trying-
management
yeah.
authorities.
Watershed management.
And that's
Yep.
through what, NRCS? No.
So through IDALS,
IDALS.
yep.
I've been working on I've been working on these issues for a while, and I'm beginning to think, to get the farm owners and the people that farm it attention, that maybe you start one of these, and then maybe they'll start thinking, because they can go to all the seminars in the world,
Right.
and you don't really catch all the people you need to catch.
Right. And Jeff Pate from Hewitt Creek is supposed to be presenting today. So yeah, so he would be able to speak to that experience.
That's pottery, that's all of us together for the panel.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
the
David.
beginning.
I'm curious on your prairie strips, if you've done research on how wide they should be. I know length would be determined by the field, but as far as the width.
Right. So that's again something where we work very closely with the farmer and farmland manager and farmland owner to try to fit something that meets their goals. We don't use it's always got to be 15 feet or always got to be 30 or always got to be 100. We design it in consultation so that it matches
Higher width or
exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Very flexible.
Yeah.
Do you have some kind of a method that if you have a certain slope, certain cells, and prairie strip is a certain width, you will capture X amount of nutrient runoff?
So we try to factor in what we call the contributing source area of water as we design the prairie strip. So if you have a larger area moving, or a larger sort of catchment, and there's a lot of rainfall that's moving across that, you're going to need a wider strip than if you would have a shorter catchment, for example. And so again, we don't use hard and fast rules. We try to fit it in with the ecosystem of the farm, along with the dialogue with the farmer, so that we can maintain farm level operations.
When I talk to operators about putting in prairie strips, can I tell them, to answer their questions, tell them that a prairie strip will reduce nitrogen runoff by X amount, by 9%, or what?
So in our results at one study site, so Neil Smith National Wildlife Refuge, what we found is that we've been able to reduce the surface water nitrogen movement by 84%, and the below ground movement of nitrogen by 70%. And that's not a tiled instance. So it would be different if the watersheds were tiled. We're now working to verify those numbers across a wider set of locations. So scientifically, what we think is that you put in the prairie strip, you're going to add structure that's going to provide function, and the measure in terms of keeping nutrients on the field is going to go up. we don't know if the magnitude is going to be exactly the same as we measured at our initial site, and so we have to, the science is trying to figure out what, how much variation is that depending on where you are. But it will have a big impact on phosphorus, and the really key thing that most of the farmers and farmland owners that we're working with are interested in is just keeping their soil in place. I mean, that's the key thing. And at our Neil Smith study site, we show that you lose 95% less soil from the area if you put the prairie strips in. And our initial work from our 6 study sites where we're assessing this is verifying those numbers. You move a lot less soil when you do a 10% prairie strip solution. Yeah.
I apologize if you covered this, but if you're a farmer or a landowner and you want to work with the STRIPS program, is there an application process? Does it just contact you, or is it limited because you already are doing very targeted things? And
so I've got a good deal for you if, if you're looking to implement prairie strips on your land. And certainly you can just email me and I can get the process going. But one of the things that the STRIPS team is doing right now is working with technical service providers and certified crop consultants across the state to train them on what we do with farmers and farmland owners. And so we just had our first class 2 weeks ago of people that are going to be certified prairie strips consultants, and they're going to be looking for farm sites where they can help landowners, help farmers implement prairie strips. So we can help you, or we can put you in touch with one of our new certified consultants, including Hannah.
how does the STRIP program, as you've developed it and conceptualized it, how does it interact with government programs, federal and state programs, cost share programs?
So we've helped about 30 farmers and farmland owners implement prairie strips on their land. About a third of them have used government cost share programs. So a combination of, it's mostly been through the CRP program, a combination of pollinator, contour buffer strip. There was one little patch of farmable wetland, and then one farmer also used the CSP program. Almost everybody has gotten some help with the seed costs through IDOLs or Pheasants Forever or Trees Forever. So there is opportunity to reduce, the cost of implementation that way. Yeah, Ann.
So we're just in the process of removing all of our not buffer strips, but the strips that go through the field that you build up these strips.
Terry?
Terrace.
The contour buffer strips? Yeah.
And putting in other strips, and we have to work with the government to do that.
Awesome.
So
Great.
it's kinda
Diverse.
interesting. We took them all out, and now we have to plant strips back, but they'll have to tell us how many strips and where.
Okay. Yep.
We'll see.
Yeah, so as I said, only about a third of the folks that we've worked with have actually used CRP or EQIP, and one of the reasons why not everybody does is because if you accept that rental payment, which is lucrative, there's oftentimes sort of constraints in terms of the strip design, and some farmers they don't want to accept those constraints, and so they forgo the rental payment. But it's always every farm is different, every farmer is different, and so we just try to work with people to find something that fits their operation and their ecosystem. Yeah.
And just real quick, because we're going to
Okay.
move real soon.
Great.
In about a minute.
I
Thanks.
just wanted to know, how do you find out about all these programs and the research that you do at Iowa State, and how do we access those?
Wow. So sort of the programs and such are ever changing, and it's really hard to keep on top of unless it's your professional full-time job. And so that's why I would recommend working with somebody, whether it be your local NRCS office or working with a technical service provider that can help you put you in touch with the right programs for you and your farm.
Thank you, Lisa.
Yep.
Sorry to cut this
Thank
off.
you. Great questions, everybody.